What's up, guys? Welcome back to Christmas. We are actually not quite to Christmas, but we are still here in the Advent season. If we check out our calendar, you can see you can see that I forgot what font I was using when I first started making this calendar. But you can also see today we will be looking at December 3rd, which is St. Barbara's Eve, and then we will also be looking at December 5th, which is St. Nicholas Eve, aka Krampusnacht. We will definitely not get to that part of it today, but we'll probably spend another 2 weeks at least talking about St. Nicholas and St. Nicholas Day. It's one of the most important parts of this calendar and one of the most interesting parts. So we will today talk about St. Barbara, and then we will talk about the life of St. Nicholas, and then next time we'll talk about how St. Nicholas Eve and St. Nicholas Day are celebrated around the world next time. So let's start by taking a look at St. Barbara. You can see here with her sword indicating the way that she was martyred. You can see this cannon, which indicates that she is the patron of artillerymen. We'll talk about that in a second. You can see the tower, which is one of her symbols. We'll see what that's about. You can see the lightning bolt, which is going to be important as well. So St. Barbara was a 3rd century Syrian Christian saint and a martyr whose feast day is December 4th. And you'll remember last time we talked about how even though a feast day might be on a certain day, a lot of the celebrations are often focused around the eve before that. Just we talked about like Halloween and All Saints Day, Christmas Eve, Christmas, and so on. So her feast day is December 4th. St. Barbara's Eve is December 3rd. That's when a lot of the spookier elements happen. But first, let's talk about her life. So her father's name was Dioscorus, and he was a pagan. He wanted to control her life, basically, so he put her in a tower, like you can see in the image here. And in a lot of images of St. Barbara, she's holding a small model of the tower. To kind of remind you, hey, remember I was locked up in a tower. While she was locked up, she became a Christian, and she actually has the tower rebuilt so that it has 3 windows in a cluster representing the Trinity, which her father does not care for. When he finds out that she's become a secret Christian, he gets really mad because he expected her to marry a pagan man, and she says, I'm not only going to not marry a pagan guy, I'm not going to marry any kind of guy. I'm going to be married to Christ. This might sound familiar to you from when we were talking about St. Catherine. It'll sound familiar again when we talk about St. Lucy coming up. But her father comes in and he's so angry that he's ruined this marriage that he had set up and that she's become a secret Christian that he tries to cut her head off. But at that exact moment, lightning, like we see here, strikes the tower, causing it to explode, opening up an opening in the tower so that Barbara can leap out and escape to the mountains. Her father chases her. You can see that in the image here. Here she's holding palm branches, which are a symbol of martyrdom, and so that's what's going on here. But here her father's chasing her through the mountains. She gives him the slip, but he finds 2 shepherds out there watching their flocks. He asks the shepherds if they had seen her. The first one says, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen any young ladies. The second one betrays her, gives her up, which reveals her location to her father, but the guy is punished by God by being turned into stone, and all of his sheep are turned into locusts. So with this information in hand, Dioscorus is able to capture Barbara, and he takes her to the prefect, the Roman governor of Syria here, and she is tortured and imprisoned. However, she remains faithful to God, and so every night in prison, God heals her wounds. She is made whole each morning, and they have to start the torture process all over again. She refuses to give in, and when they try to burn her with torches, the torches are magically extinguished as they get close to her, and so on. Finally, her father gets sick of the whole thing and does what he tried to do before his tower exploded, and he just cuts her head off. And then, as punishment for this crime of murdering his own daughter, as he's walking home, he gets struck by lightning and is consumed in an explosion of flames. Barbara's tomb then becomes a site of many miracles. She becomes a great saint. So because of Barbara's association with an exploding tower and an exploding father, she's the patron of basically any kind of job that includes explosions or gunpowder, dynamite, or anything, even big fires, anything like that. So artillerymen, if your job is to shoot a cannon or a big gun, she's your guy. Or miners who use dynamite, tunnelers who also use dynamite. She's also invoked for protection against lightning, and of course, injury by explosion. So the story, in some versions of the story, folk tales say that after Barbara had been captured by her father and was being taken to the prison, a twig from a cherry tree gets caught on her skirts and manages to stay on there even as she is thrown into the dungeon. She tends to the She tends to the twig in secret, and even inside of her dark and gloomy cell, it manages to bloom. So as a result, a common tradition for St. Barbara's Eve is to cut cherry branches, which in German are called Barbara-Zweigen, which just means Barbara branches. The word Zweige is related to the English word twig. You can see some here. You take the cut branches, you put them in water, and hopefully they will bloom. In Germany, these are mostly used as decoration, but other places take them more seriously. When I say more seriously, I just mean there's more to it than decoration. So, for example, in places, including the area of the Czech Republic, which that they used to call Bohemia, the Barbara branch they called a Barborka, which means a little Barbara. And it was used to tell your future. We talked a lot about how a lot of the special nights of Advent and the winter holidays basically are used for telling the future, especially for young women to figure out who they're going to marry. This is no exception. So what would happen is, if you are a young woman, you would cut a cherry branch or a similar kind of branch, something like that, some kind of blooming branch. You bring it in, you put it in water, and it would be used to tell your future in different ways. So for example, maybe if the branch blooms, it just means that you're going to get married within a year or a year and a day, or you'll just have good luck. Or if you have more than one single girl in the house, sisters or whatever, it would be like a race. Whoever's branch blooms first is the one who's going to get married first. Or if you have multiple people in mind that you might want to marry, you can label the different buds on the twig, and whichever one of those buds blooms first, that's the guy you're going to marry, and so on. Those kind of fortune-telling tricks. Similarly, we talked on St. Thomas's Day about the Bleigießen, which is the way of telling your future by melting down lead, or in more modern times tin or wax, and then you dump it in a bowl of water, and whatever the shape the molten metal becomes in the cool water is supposed to tell you something about your future. So you can, if you didn't do it on St. Thomas Day, you can try again on St. Barbara's Eve. But the word Barborka that we talked about, being the Czech word for little Barbara, that also refers to the cherry branches. That same word, which in the plural is Barborki, it's also used in similar parts of central Bohemia to describe a troupe of girls who would sometimes wear masks or veils, or more often they would wear their hair brushed down in front of their face, kind of like Sadako from The Ring, if you've seen that movie. And they would wear white dresses with red sashes that are supposed to represent the martyrdom of St. Barbara. Sometimes they would have black dresses or even blue sashes or some combination of that, but eventually the white dress, red sash combination kind of became the most popular one. On their left hand, they carry a basket, and in their right hand, they carry a broom or a wicker carpet beater. Let's see, you can see here's a troop of them. You can see, obviously, it's young girls under the veil here. But you can see the white dress, the red sash, and again, because this is a modern photo, you can tell that even though this is kind of an older tradition, some areas still do it. It's extremely regional, so it's likely that even if you talk to someone from the Czech Republic that you knew, it's not super likely that this is something that they do, especially if they live in an urban area. But in some areas, in central Bohemia, they do still do it. And it's one of these older traditions that's become more popular. Again, it's had a resurgence in recent years. Anyway, so troops of these Barborki, some different number of them, come out. Well, here we can see, here's some others wearing masks and veils. But what they'll do is they go in small groups from house to house, and they tap on the windows with their brooms or their carpet beaters, and then they announce that they've come from a tiny village in South Bohemia to see if there were any good children in the house. And if there are good children in the house, they will reach into their basket, they pull out sweets, candies, cookies, fruits, other things like that. If there are no good children in the house, the bad kids get a little swat from the carpet beater or the broom, and then the Barborki say, you won't be visited by St. Nicholas, who, if you remember the calendar, St. Nicholas, St. Nicholas Eve is 2 days after this. So they'll report to St. Nicholas that it's not worth coming by to leave treats for these kids in 2 days. Now, in some parts of the Bavarian Alps, which you'll remember from the past, that's southern Germany, where a lot of these traditions happen. The Alps are kind of the epicenter of a lot of interesting Christmas traditions. So in this area, similar figures to the Barborki are called the Bärbele, which also means little barbers, but in German instead of Czech. They're also called the Wild Barbaras. You can see them here. They appear on St. Barbara's Eve. And you can see in the picture they wear peasant skirts, aprons, they wear kerchiefs around their head. They carry switches, in this case very long bundles of switches. And but most distinctively, if you look, you can see they wear all sorts of different masks that tend to be made up of pine cones, moss, lichen, grass, rocks, basically anything that you might find on the forest floor. You make it into like a mosaic style mask, and you wear that, and that is the sign of a Bärbele, or a wild Barbara. And these typically, while a lot of the masked figures we're going to look at are going to be young men, wild Barbaras are young women. I think you can look and kind of see that looks like a young woman's eye under there. They tend to be young women, usually single girls over the age of 16, basically like St. Barbara herself was. They go through the streets in a parade in groups. This is called the Barbara Treiben, which means basically a Barbara drive, where they go through and the people line up along the street to see it, and they throw treats to kids like apples, nuts, cookies, and sweets. That you can also see the bells on their belts. These bells are very common to these kind of traditional costumed figures from the winter holidays, and we'll see more of those. You might remember the enormous bells from the Wolfauflassen, the giant bells that the young men wore around their waists to signal that it was time for the wolves to come back out. We talked about that for St. Martin's Day. But what they do here is they come through with their sticks, and children get, fruit and nuts and cookies and other sweets. Young men, like probably this guy here, what happens, they get swatted with these bundles of switches, which is supposed to bring good luck, but also I think it's probably just fun for the young women who undoubtedly get teased by the boys in their class. And they hit them until basically the boys hop, jump, or dance until the satisfaction of the Barbaras. And then in some areas, the Barbaras will also come through and visit homes, and they'll use their switches or brooms to go through and kind of sweep the evil out. However, if there's an evil too powerful even for the Barbaras, then no worries, because St. Nicholas will be there soon enough. And because St. Barbara's Day is so close to St. Nicholas, in the regions where wild Barbaras appear, they're often seen together in groups with wild Klausen. You can see here these furry dudes with horns. If you remember us talking about the Krampus, this is kind of a variation on the Krampus, but we'll talk more about it later at a different time. But usually, like I said, these are young dudes in costumes that they made, masks that they made. And here, look at these giant bells, these really big bells. But they also have the switches as well. That might be a wild barber right there. But my point is that these are usually clubs of young men who get together and they help each other make costumes and that kind of thing. But usually the Klausen and the Berbla, the wild Barbaras, are in the same club in these regions. But like I said, we'll talk more about Klausen, maybe not next time, but probably the time after next. But speaking of St. Nicholas, as we are, let's talk about this guy. Let's talk about his life. He is, in many ways, maybe the most important figure in terms of Christmas history. Now, I know you guys think of St. Nicholas as synonymous with Santa Claus. That's not exactly true. They are related, and we'll talk about that at an even later time. But right now, I want to take a look at St. Nicholas, the historical and legendary religious figure. The stories I'm going to tell are going to kind of be a combination of the history of the actual historical figure of St. Nicholas, and also many different legends and pieces of folklore, because it is often very difficult to distinguish one from the other. But you can see him here, his crozier. This is his bishop's staff, a sign of him as a bishop. His mitre, which is a bishop's hat. I know you guys look at this and you think Pope hat. Well, the Pope is a bishop, so the Pope wears a bishop's hat. And then also notably, he has 1, 2, 3 golden balls here, and we will see the story about why that is, but this is one of the signifiers of St. Nicholas in art. If you see a saint, you see a guy wearing a Pope hat, carrying a stick with a hook at the end, and he's also got three golden balls. That's St. Nicholas who you're looking at for sure. So St. Nicholas is one of the best known and best loved saints in all of the world in terms of popularity, in terms of churches and sites and other things being dedicated to him. He is basically the most popular saint that is not one of the apostles from the Bible. He is a protector of so many things, including children, sailors, repentant thieves, pawnbrokers, pharmacists, archers, merchants, the falsely accused, the country of Russia, the country of Greece, the city of Amsterdam, the city of Liverpool, the city of New York City, and many, many more. In fact, pawnbrokers, if you ever see a pawn shop, you'll see their symbol is made up of the 3 golden balls of St. Nicholas, because he is the patron of pawnbrokers, and so his symbol became their symbol as well. Because of the sheer number of miracles that he performed, he became known as Nicholas the Wonderworker. So Nicholas was born in the city of Patara, which you can see here on this map. This is the country of Turkey, which at that time was known as Asia Minor. You can see Constantinople, which today is Istanbul, as the song goes, which was for a time the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, and it was at the time of St. Nicholas's life, but this is the Mediterranean Sea, so this is Greece right here. Italy would be over here, basically, and then, here's Jerusalem, and so Egypt is down here, Africa is down here. So this is Patara, that's going to be important. Myra, keep in mind where that is. You see the whole region is called Lycia. So he's born in Patara. He's going to end up in Myra. They usually call him St. Nicholas of Myra. But then we'll also see a little bit about Nicaea as well. So these are all important places. And I should mention that many, but not all, of the images in the life of St. Nicholas that I'm telling here come from the excellent resource, the St. Nicholas Center website, which is an essential resource if you're wanting to know more about St. Nicholas. So he was born in the city of Patara, which is a port city in Asia Minor, which is Turkey today, on March 15th, 270 AD. So if you're ever wondering when is Santa Claus's birthday, the answer is March 15th. Santa Claus's birthday is March 15th. At that time, much of Asia Minor was Greek in its language, culture, and philosophy, but politically it was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, which it wasn't called that yet because the Western Empire still existed. But Nicholas's parents were Greek Christians whose names were either Epiphanius or Theophanes, depending on the source, and Joanna or Nana. So you can see Epiphanius here and Joanna there. And they named their baby after his uncle, who was a priest who had come to bless the baby. His name was Nicholas. So the infant Nicholas we see here in the baptismal font. From the very beginning, he shows how holy he is, because as soon as he's baptized, he looks up to heaven, he praises God. You can see the halo around him. And you can see the halo around his parents as well, meaning that they are venerated as saints as well. So he looks up to heaven, he praises God, and also he was known to refuse to nurse on Wednesdays and Fridays, which at the time would have been traditional fasting days. So he's a very holy baby. As a child, Nicholas was very serious about his education and about religion, so he would go to study with his teacher, and he spent a lot of time at church. And in fact, it was on his way to see his teacher that he performed his very first miracle as a child, the healing of a woman whose hand had become withered. You can see here it is hidden in her sleeve. Young Nicholas, as a boy here on his way to school, lays his hand upon her, makes the sign of the cross, and her hand is instantly healed. First miracle of many, many, many. Unfortunately, while still a young man, Nicholas's parents passed away from a plague while he was still young. And so Nicholas goes to live with his uncle, Nicholas, who was an abbot at a nearby monastery. He continues to grow and learn, and his parents had been quite wealthy, and so he had a large inheritance, but because he had learned to be a generous and loving kind of person, he thought, how can I use this wealth to help others? And so this gave him the opportunity to perform what is maybe the most famous story about St. Nicholas, and the thing that ties him to gift giving. Nicholas had a neighbor who was a formerly rich man who had lost his money. He had fallen into poverty. He had 3 daughters who were all unmarried, and at that time, if you had daughters that were going to marry, you had to provide her future husband with a dowry, which is something valuable like a sum of money usually, but also could be property of some kind. The idea is, I'm giving you this thing who is now going to live in your house and eat your food, so here's some money to help pay for that. And so because he didn't have any money for dowry for his 3 daughters, he was worried they would remain unmarried. They would end up in slavery or on the streets, or a sadder fate for a young unmarried girl. But Nicholas didn't want this to happen, and so when the oldest daughter became old enough to marry, Nicholas at night snuck up to the house. He threw a bag of gold in through the window, and then when the family awakes in the morning, they find out there's enough gold for the dowry for the oldest daughter. She can be married. He repeats this again for the second and third daughters. More modern retellings of this story try to tie this a little more closely to modern Santa Claus by saying that he dropped the money in through the chimney, which cannot be true because chimneys had not been invented yet in the early 4th century AD. Some even say that they landed in stockings that had been left drying by the fireplace because they really want to connect it to presents in your stockings. Or shoes, which a lot of countries who celebrate St. Nicholas Day, treats are left in shoes rather than stockings. But those are later additions to the story. In the original version, it was definitely just a window. But anyway, this is the story that connects St. Nicholas to giving gifts and establishes him as the premier gift bringer in the world. Anyway, so while he's still a young man, even though he looks old in these drawings here, he decided to follow in the footsteps of his uncle, make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, Jerusalem and such, in Israel. On his way there, on an Egyptian ship, he has a dream that warns him of a great storm that the ship will encounter, and when he wakes up, he sees the sailors and the other pilgrims on the ship. They're terrified about the storm, but he says, "Don't worry, God will protect us." The storm comes, the ship is being tossed all about, and a sailor tries to fix a mast, and he falls to his death, and Nicholas then prays and manages to resurrect this sailor. And he arises as if waking from a deep sleep. Everybody on the ship then makes it to the Holy Land safely, and then when he gets there, what was at the time the last remaining church in Jerusalem, the doors of the church miraculously fly open as Nicholas approaches. Then, on their way back from the Holy Land, if you'll remember the map from before, in the city of Myra, which is very close to Patara, where Nicholas was from, also in Lycia, the bishop there had died, and the other bishops of Lycia could not determine who should be the new bishop. But one night, while they were discussing it, the oldest bishop hears a miraculous voice saying the new bishop should be a man of victory. So keep that in mind. And so what happens is Nicholas, on his way back home, stops to attend this exact church in Myra on his return from Egypt, and he has with him the sailor who he brought back to life. The sailor overhears the church elders discussing their search for a man of victory, and the sailor says, "Hey, you know who I'm with? This guy, Nicholas." And the name Nicholas is a combination of the Greek word Nike, yeah, like Nike, like your Nike shoes, which means victory, and laos, which means the people. And so Nikolaos means a victory for the people, because the idea is through his actions and example, Nicholas would lead the people to victory over evil. So when they find out that he is indeed a man of victory, the elders name Nicholas the Bishop of Myra, even though he says, "Wait, I'm too young." Again, he looks old in the pictures, but he's supposed to be young at this time. And he's like, "I don't have any experience. I'm not even a priest or anything." And they're like, "Don't worry about it. This is God's will. It'll be fine." So, maybe needless to say, even though he was young and inexperienced, he carried out his duties as Bishop of Myra with enthusiasm and faithful service, and so as a result, he was renowned as a protector of the poor. He was a fierce advocate for justice for the underprivileged. One example of that comes from the second most famous story of St. Nicholas, which connects him to children. That's the other thing, is St. Nicholas is the protector of children. This story comes from 3 young men who were schoolboys, and they were on their way to school, traveling with their money for school, and on their way they needed to stop at an inn, which was owned by a butcher. And he says, "You can stay here," but he was keeping an eye on their fat wallets full of gold, and while they slept, he killed them and cut them up and threw their bodies into a pickle barrel. And then later St. Nicholas comes by, and he asks for some hospitality, and the butcher's like, "I don't have any food, I don't have any meat." And St. Nicholas says, "Don't you though? You have very fresh meat." And then he opens the barrel, and the 3 boys come out. And so this is how Nicholas gets associated as the protector of children. And believe it or not, this innkeeper butcher guy is going to come back. Not today, but we will see him again. So this is what establishes St. Nicholas as the protector of children, the children's friend, as he is known. Another famous miracle of St. Nicholas deals with the time when there was a great famine in Lycia, and Nicholas was doing everything he could to find grain. What happens is a ship bound for Alexandria in Egypt comes through Myra with a large cargo of wheat. Nicholas says, "Can I buy some of this?" And they're like, "No, all this grain is accounted for, has to be delivered to Egypt." Nicholas says, "Look, don't worry, sell me 100 bushels of wheat and I promise there won't be any shortage when you get to where you're going." And as it turns out, that was true. Even though he sold 100 bushels, they get there and it turns out his cargo was exactly the same as it had been when he first loaded up the ship, and there was enough grain in Lycia to last for 2 years, and until the famine was over, and there was enough grain left over to seed the next harvest. So, cool miracle. However, despite all of these good deeds and all of his good miracles, Nicholas found himself arrested during the persecution of Christians that was led by the Roman Emperor Diocletian in the early years of the 4th century AD. However, he was released following the ascendancy of the Emperor Constantine, who very famously, with his Edict of Milan in the year 313 AD, made Christianity legal throughout the Roman Empire. And by 325, St. Nicholas was in attendance at Constantine's Council of Nicaea, which was the first ecumenical council, meaning the first gathering of all the bishops from throughout the known world. And while a lot of people believe that the Council of Nicaea was held in order to determine which books would go into the New Testament, that's actually not true at all. And the Council of Nicaea was held because of a discussion about a theologian named Arius, who had argued that Jesus the Son was actually not equal to God the Father, and this is called the Arian heresy. And so the Council of Nicaea was gathered in order for the bishops to decide what are they going to do about this heresy that was actually getting very popular throughout many parts of Europe. And as the story goes, that as the discussion continued, St. Nicholas got so angered by Arius's arguments that Jesus the Son was a creation of God the Father, that he actually strode across the council floor and he punched Arius in the face. And it turns out that it's actually illegal to punch anyone, even a heretic, in the presence of the emperor. So St. Nicholas is thrown in jail, again, by a different Roman emperor. He's stripped of his bishop's robes. He says, "You're not a bishop anymore." He's put in chains. But overnight, Nicholas prays, and then Jesus and the Virgin Mary appear to him and say, "Hey, why are you in chains, bud?" And he's like, "Well, Jesus, it's because I loved you so much that I punched a guy." And so Jesus was like, "That's not fair." So he breaks the chains, gives him back his book of the Gospels. Mary gives him his bishop's stole. You can see here this thing, his big cool wrap that he's got here. And when the emperor gets back in the morning with the jailers, they see that Nicholas's chains have all been broken. He's sitting there with his book and all of his bishop's clothes, and he's just sitting inside this open jail cell. And Constantine is like, "Okay, obviously you're good." So he's freed. He's reinstated as the Bishop of Myra. There was actually another minor incident at the Council of Nicaea involving our boy Nicholas. What happens is one night at dinner, sitting at the table, he fell asleep, and all of the other bishops around him were very amused. But what was actually happening was that St. Nicholas was astral projecting, like Dr. Strange, and his spirit had sailed out across the world to where it had been summoned by sailors who were caught in a storm. So he spreads out his hands, calms the storm, blesses the sailors, and then comes back to his body. When he wakes up, the other bishops say, "Hey, what were you dreaming about?" And he goes, "Well," he says that a ship and its sailors had been rescued. And all the bishops are like, yes, I see. He's speaking symbolically. The ship is the church, and the sailors are all of the all the members of the church, and they all kind of nod sagely, like they fully understand the symbolism of what he's saying. Anyway, this is just another example of why St. Nicholas is a protector of sailors. So he did way more miracles than we have time to talk about today, including catching a sword in his bare hand in order to save the lives of 3 innocent men. Yes, lots of others. But one notable element of his life was his reputation as a demon tamer, and that's going to come back. We will talk about that very soon. But one of the most notable stories about that is in Lycia and Asia Minor in general at the time, the worship of Diana, aka Artemis, the Greco-Roman goddess of the hunt, was very popular at the time, and the temple of Diana in Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Now, according to the story, St. Nicholas, much like we talked about St. Martin, how he went around destroying pagan temples and altars, St. Nicholas went through destroying the cult of the goddess goddess Artemis, and according to legend, he destroyed this temple by lifting it up miraculously with his mind, flipping it upside down, and dropping it down onto its foundations, leaving the various demons dwelling within to scatter to the 4 winds. However, despite this, perhaps his greatest miracle, if you know anything about saints or have been paying attention as we talked about saints in the last couple of weeks, is that he died peacefully of old age on December 6th in 343 AD, and that's why his feast day is December 6th, which is generally true. Not always, but generally speaking, a saint's feast day is the day that they died. But as you may know, in order to qualify as a saint, you have to do a number of posthumous miracles performed after you have died. And St. Nicholas has no shortage of these, many of which include him protecting children and fighting demons, like I talked about, including the one illustrated here, where you can see this young boy comes to the door while his parents are busy, where a demon is waiting for him, and the demon strangles him, and then the spirit of St. Nicholas raises him from the dead. That's what's going on in that picture there. He also rescues a kidnapped child, and there's all sorts of different stories. More saving sailors from storms, getting justice for people who have been cheated, and all those kind of things. But shortly after Nicholas was buried in his hometown of Myra, his tomb began producing what is called manna, which you can see here in these bottles. It is a holy liquid with miraculous healing properties. The tomb produces it at certain times each year. They withdraw it, they put it in bottles. You can see it here. And it did this for several centuries until the year 1087 AD, at which point Myra and much of Turkey had fallen under the control of the Seljuks, which are a faction of Turks who were hostile towards Christianity. And so what happens then is there are a group of merchant sailors from the Italian city of Bari, you can see right there, right on the high heel of that boot. So on the eastern coast of Italy, from Bari, they decided that they should go rescue the remains of their beloved saint and bring him back to Bari, which, you know, as an added bonus, would raise Bari's profile as a pilgrimage destination. So once they got there, the 47 sailors made their way to the shrine and tomb of St. Nicholas in Myra. They asked the guardians of the shrine to show them where the body of the saint is. The custodians, they suspected the sailors were up to something, which they were, so that's fair, and they took them to the wrong room. But one of the sailors realizes this is a trick, because he's like, the body of the saint has to be in the same room as the room where the manna comes from, so he's like, please take us to the real body. And the custodians, they refuse, even though the sailors try to bribe them. They've threatened them with violence. The sailors even lie and say that they're there because the Pope told them to go, but the custodians are like, no. So the sailors tie the priests up, and they bar the doors, and they say, no one's getting out of here until we get what we want. And so they continue arguing, and what happens is one of the custodians places a glass vial on a low column, and as they argue, the vial falls over, it lands with a loud clang, doesn't break, and it rolls over to where the body is. At that point, the jig is up, And the custodians admit that what had happened was that people in Myra have been having visions that the body of the saint was going to leave there soon, and so they were being extremely protective. And they said, okay, you can have the body, the relics, the remains of St. Nicholas if the saint himself consents. So they find where the crypt is, they break open the floor covering it, and inside there's a pure white marble tomb inside. And when it's opened, the body is found intact, not a skeleton as you might expect after almost 700 years. And it's an intact body lying in a pool of manna, the healing liquid. The room is filled not with the smell of rotting flesh, but rather with a pleasant aroma like perfume, which fills not only the shrine, but goes out into the city and can be smelled by the other sailors who are waiting at their ships miles away. And then when they smell this, they know that is literally the sweet smell of success. So this cloud of nice smells is taken as the final sign that the sailors have the thumbs up from St. Nicholas. And so the sailors from Bari take the body out to their ships, followed by a procession of the inhabitants of Myra, who are wailing and crying, wading out into the water, chasing the body of their beloved saint. But the sailors make their way back to Italy, and they find themselves stuck in a lull and unable to sail any further once they get to Patara, Nicholas's birthplace, even though there's perfect sailing weather. So the sailors are like, this must be a miracle. Who stole some relics? And so each sailor is made to swear upon the Gospels, and then it's revealed that 5 sailors had stolen pieces of the relics, at which they return, at which point Nicholas appears in a dream to one of the sailors and says, you guys are clear to get all the way home. So the sailors make it back to Bari with the body, and they build a church there around the saint's new tomb, which continues to produce manna to this very day. There's a real church. You can go there. You can't literally go there right now because Americans are not allowed to leave the country, but theoretically you could go there and you could see the tomb. Each year the manna is extracted on May 9th, which is the anniversary of the sailors bringing the body from Asia Minor to Italy, which is called the Feast of the Translation. The word translation here meaning the carrying across, the moving of the body. The 47 sailors themselves are also buried at this basilica near to the body of the saint, and again, you could see them today if theoretically Americans could leave the country. You can see, here's a picture, there it is, that's the tomb of St. Nicholas, that's where his body is. This is in Italy. This is the shrine and everything. There it is. So, as a result of this successful expedition, St. Nicholas is established as the patron of thieves. Penitent thieves, usually guys who feel sorry about what they did, but also those who steal for noble causes, which arguably is what happened with these sailors. And it's really after the translation of the relics of St. Nicholas to Bari that St. Nicholas and his popularity explodes. And it's at this time that St. Nicholas becomes established as the great wonder worker, the great gift bringer, and that's when the celebration of St. Nicholas Day as a gift-giving holiday and all that kind of stuff really starts. And so next time we will talk about the ways in which St. Nicholas Day are celebrated around the world. All right, we'll see you then, and until next time, Merry Christmas.